we just start right with this. This is what happens. We sit down and it's like we hit the record button just so we don't miss anything. But yeah, so for those who missed the pre-show, is me getting out of the seat, running back and forth, I'm like, am I going to be in frame for the wide shot? Because I can't see. But yeah.
Trying to focus on a nothing person in your seat.
Yeah. You mentioned like putting things there. I used to do, even with photography, if you were doing self-portraits, you would do this, right?
Yes.
And I notoriously, I had a really good, this is years and years ago with living with my roommate, Damien. He had a big, one of those like, steamers for like shirts, but it had this big pole and you would put shirts on it. So it was perfect. I would just wheel the steamer out with a shirt or something on it.
Not with the steamer, but I've been there. It's usually a pile of books or a notice on the back of a very tall...
Or a broomstick, vacuum cleaner or something with a hat, something to be where in the plane of focus of where,
The things we do when we're sad and alone and we have to take video or photos.
Well, you're like, it's a struggle, sometimes, but yeah.
Anyway, yes.
No end to the... I'm just paranoid watching these record buttons. I can, in fact, confirm everything is recording.
Great.
So, okay. So we had an episode. I'm getting confused too in the order of which episodes will release from when we record them. But I'm like, the last time we recorded, we took a break from AI. I don't think we can do that.
No.
I don't think we can do that this week.
This is AI on steroids, I think, this week, just reflecting what's happening in the world.
Absolutely. But before we get into that, I thought I would spend a little bit of time we'll do a short cold open with this part.
Yep.
But I thought it would be fun to really sort of kick off today's episode with essentially just a thank you to all of our incredible listeners.
Which has been amazing.
Yeah, I've been blown away by the amount of support and feedback we've gotten.
Yep.
I don't know I can't remember if I told you this. I probably did. I got recognized on the street locally.
You're a celebrity.
Well, the funny thing was,
I haven't, by the way.
I was. It was one of these moments. It was by a Starbucks and was recognized by somebody that I don't know them well, but we've crossed paths before. But it was really nice. And the funny part is I was so tempted to be like, do you want to take a picture? And it's not for them, for me to be like, look, a fan, a real life fan. We have one. Proof. Like, I want proof. Like, no.
I thought you were going to go the other way there. It's like the embarrassment of with my books when somebody asks if they can have a copy of my book and I immediately say, yeah, do you want me to sign it?
No, thanks.
And they look at me a bit weird and say, no.
No, thanks. I'm good. I just want the book. Like, don't even waste your time putting the ink on it.
Right.
Yeah. Well, ultimately I just was like, thank you very much. Didn't say anything, but because there is that moment. And I always hear like somebody like Conan O'Brien in my head who is, famous for just the self-deprecation of these kind of things too. Yeah. But I'm like, that rejection, like the fear of that rejection. Like, do you want a picture? And they're like, actually, no, I don't. I'm like, I'm just not going to.
So yeah, good job you didn't go.
Yeah, I'm not going to take a saw to the branch that I'm sitting on, right?
But it has been really gratifying seeing the level of support and excitement about what we're doing.
It has been. It's been incredible. And, always when we launch a new thing, there's this excitement about trying to look at all the data and see where things are going. And, I always try to temper that in some ways too. Yeah. So I don't look all the time, but it was nice. Just recently, with the release of our last episode, I just was curious. So went into some of the analytics. And one of the things that was really, I think, very heartwarming for me, but also I think it's just cool. So again, as a thank you, is that we've been downloaded and listened to in over 60 countries around the world.
Wow. That's pretty amazing, actually.
Yeah, yes. Which is wonderful. And, I thought maybe I could also just take a second and just call out quickly just some of our top 10.
Mm-hmm.
So,
okay,
and by percentages, right? So United States, no surprise there.
Yep.
Followed by the United Kingdom.
Good.
Australia.
Thanks, UK.
Yeah, Australia, our friends from down under. Canada, our cold neighbors to the north. Sweden, Switzerland, Germany, the Netherlands,
good,
Spain, and Singapore.
Wow.
Of our top 10 as of today's record date.
Yep. So now the challenge is on. If you're not in one of those countries, get your friends involved and see what we can do with the league table.
That's right. And I think that would be I think, when we started this podcast, just kind of coming back to the origins. Part of the goals of this, and we were having some conversations recently that brought this back, is also just as a public service in a way to get this information, get the ideas behind the future of being human, the ideas of what's happening. I mean, the whole idea of Modem Futura, and again, coming back to the name, the album art, is really trying to take all of these different noises and signals and translate them into something that makes more communicatable sense.
Yep, I agree, especially at this time. So, I mean, this is obviously coming out of Arizona State University's Future of Being Human initiative. And just talking to people, it seems like this question of what does it mean to be human in a technological future? What does it mean to be human in an AI future? Is so important and so high on people's thinking and minds at the moment.
Absolutely. And is there, I mean, just even off that, is there a technological future that is not an AI future right now? I don't know. Well, and it, and I think
there is when it all crashes and goes pear-shaped. But
well, true. Hey, right? We can dive into the dystopian, the joys of starting over.
But not today, because today is about everything that's happening that's big and transformative.
Yeah. And and just one last bit, and then we'll take a pause and we'll fire this thing up. But even this morning, I was listening to a podcast that had somebody from, I forget his name, but he was a former, what do they call him, like chief of go-to products or something? I don't even understand
what is that.
Basically, an internal hype. There's someone who's fanning the hype fuel, by the way.
Yes. Yeah.
But from OpenAI, and one of the things that they had said was, one of the reasons why did you leave? And one of the questions was, he's like, well, I started questioning all these things, like what will it mean to be human in the future? And am I doing enough for that? So they ultimately left to go do other things.
Yep.
But I think it is, one, good to hear that also people in these companies that are having such massive influence are starting to question and ask that exact question.
Yep.
Now, I'll be honest, my blood boiled a few times while listening to this because their viewpoint of this technology will just solve technology, which was just solve technology. Yeah. I don't necessarily agree with at all. Yeah. But it was nice to hear. And I think, so again, thank you to all of our listeners. And if you enjoy what we're listening to or it sparks conversations, pass it along to another friend who you want to spar with.
That gives us the fuel to keep on going, knowing that you are listening.
That's right.
And of course, leave us a review. It's a bit embarrassing asking this, but it means a big thing to us when we see people that think that what we're doing is important enough that they're willing just to give us a star rating somewhere or even just leave a few words of review. Yeah. Incredibly helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Or you might hurt my feelings. I don't
Right. Yeah.
That's okay. It's all right. That's fine. I like to think my skin is thick enough.
There we are. Yes.
Right. We'll see. But yes, big thank you to everyone. And we look forward to just continuing to create some incredible conversations, from when we get to have special guests on. It's incredibly fun.
Yep.
Looking forward to that. But
on with the show.
Let's take a break and we'll come right back.
Initializing waveform.
Modulating signals for transmission.
Exploring the possible, probable, and preferable futures.
Welcome to Modem Futura. All right. Well, Andrew, we just spent time saying thank you to everyone, but I think it's funny. I always want to rush past introducing myself.
Right.
One, because I'm like, our names are on the podcast, but I'm Sean Leahy and joined with my amazing co-host,
Andrew Maynard.
And that means this is Modem Futura, the show that explores the intersection of technology, society, and the possible, probable, and preferable futures, asking deep questions like, what will it mean to be human in the future? And today, so 2025 keeps on giving, and we had just recorded. So just to backtrack again, we had Mark Daly on, which was an amazing episode. So go back if you haven't listened to that. Please go back and listen to it because it's amazing. So many nuggets. Like the podcast he joined us on might be the one that has the most like quotable sentences per minute than we've had. But even so, we said, Mark, he's using ChatGPT Pro and was saying all these things, he can't stop using it and it's so valuable. We're like, we'll come on. Between that, DeepSeek R1 drops and it was like this craziness.
Right. Yes.
Right.
But I think we preempted that beautifully.
Yeah.
So yes, we recorded on a Thursday. I think on the Friday to Sunday, DeepSeek R1 came out, and then our podcast came out the Tuesday afterwards. And I think we set the scene perfectly.
Yeah, absolutely. And then our podcast, drops. Then we recorded it on a Thursday, and then it drops on a Tuesday, and the Sunday night before that, OpenAI releases Deep Research.
Yes. Which is another game changer.
So it's like, oh my God, we just cannot. It's almost like we have to do this as like a daily news thing.
I know. And we've been trying to get away from this, but I've got to say, so when we talked to Mark, I had been using the $200 a month version of OpenAI's ChatGPT. And we talk on the show about sort of $200 a month. That's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money. 10 times what the other paid account
that's
tiers,
right.
Which is $20 US.
And I took out a subscription just for a month because this is what we do, exploring these technologies in the context of the future of being human. And I had already canceled that subscription. So in a week or so's time, it goes because I thought this is great, but I just don't have enough use for it.
Yeah.
And then Deep Research comes out. I cannot see how I can possibly cancel this subscription now. I am using it so much already. It's been out less than a week.
I know.
And it's deeply flawed, but I still feel that there's something there that is transformative. And something Mark said to me in an email was, remember, this is the worst it will ever be. And it's already impressive.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a funny, I feel like that's a phrase that we often throw out, or anyone throws out as soon as you're like, but it kind of sucks.
Right.
You're like, well, it's the worst it will ever be.
And we ought to talk about how it sucks because we got to have that balance.
Yeah. And to frame it today, I, even after that conversation, I was like, same thing. I was like, I don't think I need to activate that tier of subscription yet, because what would I do with it?
Right.
To be honest, I was struggling to see what I would gain in a productive enough way. Because as Mark had said in the pipe, that he uses it so much that the gain, it's well worth the value for him, right?
Yep.
But if you're not using, and as you said, when you were using it to code those experimental web-based games and things where you have to constantly be hitting it, okay. But I was questioning, like, well, my $20 a month, so I don't even know what they call it, the plus version or whatever it is. Yep. What would I gain with spending 10x on that?
Pro,
given that I'm not coding, or if I do, it's just little bits and bobs here and there.
Yep.
So I was really struggling. But then when that Deep Research came out, it was like, aha, this is not just more deeper access to the system I kind of already had access to. Now it was a tool that was really interesting.
It changes things a lot.
So quickly then activated. So I've had access now for 48 hours, something like that. But yeah, I mean, and also I have to wonder too, do you think, because initial use, I think and I want to hear what your sort of initial thoughts on kind of some of its shortcomings, because it's something you use it and you're like, this doesn't feel finished.
That's right.
By any stretch. And I do wonder how much of that was a sort of like reflexive move based on the week before of DeepSeek suddenly, I mean, in that span, the stock market, the value of a lot of these tech companies took a bath.
That's right. Yes.
Because of the threat.
So it may have been premature, although we do know that internal to OpenAI, they've been using it internally for a while now, so they've been stress testing it.
Sure.
But there are so many things that are frustrating about it. And I also feel that it's changing every day. Every time I use it, the interface feels different, the responsiveness feels different. But I have got to tell you, the one thing that is driving me absolutely round the bend, and it should be easily fixable, is I want it to write papers with inline citations and references, just like an academic paper.
Yep.
So it makes a point. It references the paper that comes from with the name of the author and the year, and then that's in the references at the back. No matter how many times I tell it to do this, it will not.
Yep.
Instead, it puts these inline links to web pages, which is great if you're in OpenAI's environment. If you cut and paste to something else, it's useless.
It's worse than that. It causes a lot of work for you to go, because then you got to do the due diligence. You got to clean it. Yeah. No.
And then I've got to
please.
tell you this, because this was just before I came into the studio
Sharpen
to
that
record.
axe. Take it to it.
I will get to this. I'm actually using this for a big project at the moment, but it did this. It created this really nice report with all these really lousy references in. So I said, ChatGPT, can you keep exactly the same text, go through and replace every time you reference a website with the author date citation?
Okay.
So it starts transferring through, gets through the first page and said, do you want me to continue? So I said yes. So it starts at the beginning of the first page again, does the first page, says, do you want to continue? It would not do the whole document.
Can you?
So you've got this flash of brilliance that you just cannot find resolution with.
Yeah, that is frustrating, because I mean, I would echo those similar frustrations. The inline citations is just beyond confusing and frustrating.
And it should be so easy to fix.
It should be.
Yeah.
I mean, original, as the progression has come along, I mean, originally you would get lots of the, air quote hallucinations of just because, it's just probabilistic and it's filling in like, this looks like a citation. So it's come, a tremendous way in terms of its accuracy and validity.
Right, the reliability of what it gives you, yes. Although not 100%,
no,
I would
still
say,
used, hey, if you're going to use any of these outputs, that is on the user to trust, verify, and make sure. Because ultimately, whether you're using that system or you're writing it yourself or you're working with colleagues, at the end of the day, it goes out under the name of the person who's putting it. It's your responsibility to check.
Absolutely
is. But even within that, though, so it is good. Mm-hmm. There's always a danger, in my opinion, when it gets, like, let's say it gets 75%.
Yep.
Right. So you're like, most of it, and then you're like, well, it's
probably right.
Every time I've checked, it's been right. And then that one time you don't.
But it's where you recognize the author, the year feels right, the title feels right. So you say, yeah, that's right. And then you suddenly realize it just does not exist. Made it up.
Or that journal, you're like, what is that? Yeah, I think that's because there's so many too, right? You're like, that sounds right.
Yeah.
No, but same, the thing that has been frustrating. Well, I'll add one.
Yes.
The bullet points. You cannot. So,
dear OpenAI, please teach ChatGPT not to use bullet points for everything.
Or at least be receptive if I say don't use them.
Right.
Like, it's fine if maybe that's a default. And then I want to say, when I give this thing, like, also don't use bullet points. And then you get back all these things in every paragraph. Bullet point.
I know. It's like the baseline. It's okay while it remembers what you told it, and then it reverts to type.
Oh my goodness!
But with all of these, I've got to say, this is still an amazing tool. And again, remembering that this is the worst it'll be. And I'll give you an example. I think it's okay to say this. So I'm for the last 12 plus years, I've been on the World Economic Forum's group that looks at emerging technologies and writes the report every year. And we were having one of our meetings this morning for the 2025 top 10 emerging technologies,
which we will cover here on Modem Futura in the future.
When they come out, look forward to them in June. But what I was finding is, we were going through these technologies, and you find every technology is interesting, but it's hard to find deep expertise on a wide range of technologies. So I just started typing with each one to ChatGPT with deep thinking, sort of give me a sort of a research brief on this. And the downside was we go through these so fast that even though it takes only sort of 5-10 minutes for this to come up, it's a little bit behind. But the quality of those real-time briefs was mind-blowing. It was the equivalent of having 2 or 3 research staff going away and spending about a week doing
and coming back with it
in real time,
in like 3 minutes or
that's
something.
Right. And it made me realize, in this sort of situation where you need up-to-date insights in areas where you just can't have all the experts in the room, it is an absolute game changer.
Yeah. Well, and it's, that use case is really exciting.
Yes.
Also, even just, again, I've had access to this platform in full for 48 hours, but not too much. That's almost the same time as this has been released. But even in that too, like how quickly, because I remember the conversation with Mark, and this was before this tool, so he didn't have access to this tool yet.
Right.
And I remember when he was kind of saying that one of the big differences, he gave the analogy of like, would you hire a Michelin star chef or like a line cook?
Fry cook, yes.
Yeah. And I remember pausing on that, and when I listened back to it, I was like, well, yeah, but I'm so tired of those like gastronomic. I'm like, I don't want to eat smoke with
you want the fry pub, the fry cook.
Like, but one of the things that he had said that I think really resonated was how it had transitioned from just being something to help wordsmith
Yeah.
and became something on the front end of research.
Yes.
And that stuck with me. And that was one of the things I was like, okay, that was for me one of the things that I am really curious to try to push this system and try.
Yeah.
And I will say, I mean, even, the first try was like, I changed kind of my perspective and how I was asking it to do some of this work. And right away, it gave back some really interesting stuff.
Yep.
And that was, to me, the first time, because I've been using ChatGPT since launch. But that was the first time it really felt like, I don't even want to use the word partner necessarily, but it felt legitimate. The stuff I was getting back, you would go, yeah. This is what I was talking about. And this is good. This is language to the idea that I was expressing.
Yep.
And that was like, okay, you're giving me like some meat and potatoes here to the dinner courses that the menu that I'm constructing.
That's right. It's giving you an intellectual lever. Depending on which country you're in. So it's, for those of you in the UK, lever.
Yeah, lever.
But it's giving you that ability to vastly extend and expand what you're doing. And I'm sure some people who are listening are thinking, this is just an illusion. This is just the old stochastic parrot that is just parroting stuff.
Sure.
There's actually nothing of value there. I would fundamentally disagree.
Okay.
So I do not
defend.
Yeah. I do not think that AI at the moment is generative in the sense that it is developing new knowledge and knows it is developing new knowledge.
Yep.
But it has the ability to weave together areas of understanding and knowledge and expertise that are generative in the fact that for a human to do that will be incredibly difficult to find those patterns and those connections and summarize that and pull inferences from it. You could do it if you had a big team of incredibly bright people who are also incredibly good at working together.
Yeah.
But it's the fact that if you know something about the domains you're working with and you can get this to pull together all these resources and give you insights that you may have missed or insights that are slightly outside your area of expertise that begin to play on it, that then becomes transformative. So it's the partnership between you and the AI that becomes deeply generative from a research perspective.
Yeah. And I think that's the exciting bit because, and people have, I think ever since the launch of these things, people who have been very pro use of these tools have made that claim of, but now I think the difference is it moves beyond, you get glimmers of it to like, it's pretty impressive.
Yes.
And because again, if you're sitting there and you're like, I'm interested to write a paper about some topic, or like I said, you have these interests in domains. I'm hesitant to share the ones I did because I don't want someone else to go, good idea, and beat me to it. But what's really interesting is it is like pulling in. What I've found to be interesting too is the connections it draws are not necessarily like, oh yes, that's publishable, but these connections make me go, I didn't think of it that way.
Yes.
And now that gives me something to chase down and inquire. I mean, what it does is it triggers my inquiry of, I didn't think about that. And now let me dig into that piece.
So absolutely. So you can see things in a different way. And just to really sort of underline that the first thing I did, so this came out on Sunday. And on the Monday, I gave it a really tough task. And something I've been working on for some time now is thinking about new ways of thinking about technology transitions. And I've made the argument that we need new modes of thinking, new models, new ideas here. It's just that I haven't had the time to write the papers. So I sat down and I gave deep research a really deep task of coming up with novel, radical new thinking and ideas around how to navigate advanced technology transitions. And I think this is probably because it had just been launched. It took 12 hours to do this. I suspect it will only be 20 minutes now. But what came back... so I know enough about this that I could evaluate the depth and the utility of it. Many of the points it made were points that I've been talking about for a number of years, but they were brought together in such an eloquent, compelling way. I don't think I could have written that paper. And it even brought in some perspectives that I hadn't thought about. So to me, this was incredible. I mean, I'm an expert in this area, and it did better than I could have done on my own, given a few weeks or a few months, and it did it in 12 hours.
Well, I think that's one of the affordances, right? Is it gives even experts in their domain the affordances of what it's, because, when you go, again, going back to how large these models are, how much information they've trained on. I mean, I'll say it sort of in tongue in cheek, but they've trained on every bit of human accessible knowledge that it can garble up. I mean, so you're also getting those pieces that have been out there where, I mean, there is things buried in journals that is tremendous work that I will never come across. Because it's just the way that's in my life, in my small little blip of a human lifespan in the cosmos, I will never come across that.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And it can tease those out. Yes.
It can tease those out, or bring them, or exactly that, bring them to the surface and allow me to then engage my sort of normal human powers of inquiry. Right. Yes. I'm curious about that. I don't know what that is. Let me find out the answer to that.
Yes.
And look. So I think that's.
Yep.
You know,
it is. So it's fascinating to see where this is going to go. Another thing that has struck me just playing with it is a really good antidote to academic hubris.
Yeah.
So you know what academics are like. Your persona, who you are as a person is built on what you know and what you study. You have that knowledge, that intelligence, which is unique to you, and that is your unique selling point. But it's usually this very, very narrow sort of spike function, if you like.
Yep.
But it means that if somebody comes along with a different perspective, maybe drawing on other disciplines, your immediate response is to say, no, that doesn't fit within my sort of narrow domain, my narrow spike. Therefore, you are wrong. So you begin to close down thinking.
Looking at you, editor, reviewer number 2.
That reviewer number 2, yes, yeah, and this is how conventional academics survive. At least, sort of middle of the road ones. They protect their intellectual domain fiercely. What this new tool does, and I think we'll see this go even further, is it brings in different perspectives. So I can imagine you have an academic expert in an area. Somebody gets ChatGPT to write a report sort of associated with that area. The first instinctive response of the academic is to say, no, it's wrong because I know better. But the appropriate response is to say, that's interesting. There are a whole load of perspectives here that I didn't think of and I wasn't aware of because they're outside of my sphere of immediate sort of expertise. But this is stimulating because it pushes me in different directions. And that is where I think this is a counter to this academic hubris. And it allows us to be humble in a very, very creative and generative way as academics as we begin to embrace new ideas that are unearthed by this tool.
Yeah. I mean, so I would just extend that with I'm going to call on people's powers of imagination to envision these things. Going back, I forget what that term was, aphasia or something like that.
Oh, goodness.
We talked about that. Remember envisioning like the elephant or whatever?
So people typing into
I think that's what it's called.
Aphasia?
I think that's what it is. I
can't remember. Yes.
But so one way I saw this visualized this is 15, maybe even 20 years ago. That while you were talking about that, this envisioning that of a model that I'm having is right. So when you think about all of the world's knowledge on a domain is a circle. So draw a circle on a whiteboard or a piece of paper, and then it's like, and the original task was like, where do scholars and PhDs and experts, where do they come in, right? And so you go through this whole challenge of you learn the core, you learn all through all this experience, and as you get to the edge, what you pioneer in finding that new knowledge, new experience, you make this little spike that just goes like, think of it just like bursting outward with this little tiny spike. And then once you get there, the rest of the circle now swells to that size.
Right, yes.
And when you were talking about this, the thing that, normally the traditional model was lots of individual little spikes, right? That represent that needle of my very tightly defined area or of expertise or domain. But what's sort of exciting to me when you were talking about that was thinking about it as how quickly that circle of all human knowledge could actually expand.
Yes.
Because now it's not one little spike over here and one little spike. Those spike like water droplets. Those spikes come together and get bigger. And then it's just like that.
And some much bigger spikes as well. So yes, just using that image, you can imagine sort of the conventional sort of research field still being full of these really, really little spikes. And then the AI enhanced researchers, the researchers that understand how to collaborate this as a tool, they're the ones producing these massive spikes. So yes, you have this rapid expansion of knowledge and understanding and insights. But the people that are driving it are now the people who understand how to work with advanced AI. They pretty much I can imagine a future where they pretty much make the conventional thinkers somewhat redundant. And in fact, one of the things I'm grappling with now is thinking about a non-AI enhanced researcher. Do they become an anachronism? Do they become the equivalent of an artisan?
It's like a gauntlet
researcher?
throwdown almost.
It is, but I now have this image in my head of
Yeah.
the artisan academic, the academic that does what they do without AI, and the only value in what they do lies in the fact that it has the human touch to it. The actual utility of the knowledge doesn't have value because you could do far more than that if you were AI enhanced.
Yeah.
So the question is, are we going to be investing in artisanal academia, artisanal sort of
Just like your
intellectualism,
sandwiches or
or whatever you want to call it? Yes. That maybe this is my future. I'm going to become an artisanal academic,
artisanal scholar, right?
Yes.
It's like,
but it is challenging.
It is challenging, and I think so that I mean, people who have listened to our show for the beginning know I love going backwards to pull things in, and I think this also does bridge kind of nicely with Heidegger's sort of view on like the technology philosophy in some ways. And maybe I should pause and kind of back up and tell people who
are we talking about?
Who this even is. So we're going backwards in time. If you're not familiar, basically a German philosopher, Martin Heidegger. So he 1889 to 1976. Best known for a lot of his work in existential phenomenology and ontology. And what that means basically is the philosophy of being, how things exist, and what does that mean. I feel like ontological or is such a great word, but it's a word you would use, and you're like, what is that?
So it's when you started talking about ontological and deontological, really big words where people think, what the heck are you talking about?
As an artisanal,
right? Yes.
I use words like ontological, but I mean, what that means is it's a branch of philosophy that deals with the nature of being. How do we know what things? I think, therefore I am kind of what is the existent features of entities that share things in common?
Yes.
You exist, I exist. We can we can actually debate that.
Right.
But you exist in my mind, but do we know if anything in this world exists outside of that? I don't know. And therein lies some of the fun. Yeah. But he again, sort of had some work early in the late 1920s, being in time. But when it comes to technology, has really been known for a work that came out in 1954 called The Question Concerning Technology. And so really sort of thinking about this idea of technology as a way of revealing the world, not just merely a tool.
Yes.
And so really sort of framing this different again, this idea of, is technology an instrument or is itself an ontological? Like, does it create? And there's ties in here too when we were talking about Oscar Wilde's thing, right? Is the world only beautiful to you when it's exposed through some other means? Right.
Yes. Yep.
But really thinking about the way that sort of deals with technology, I think it's really well situated to talk about AI as well, because, right? So there's this idea of, again, whether or not it's just the tool is just a tool, or does it create things or disclose the world to us in new ways?
Right. Yes.
With that, I'll say there's also the English word we can use is enframing.
Okay.
But the better word, it's of course, it's a German word, so they're always fun, is gestell. Okay. Right? So this idea of framing things. And in there, what is, I think, really compelling is sort of drawing this broader this broader debate of whether if you essentially if you over categorize things, that things are only, so again, you think about things as this tool, things are only quantifiable or knowable through this tool. You reduce everything down to something that can just be replaced by a tool.
Yes.
And you can get sucked into that that mindset or philosophy. You can get sucked into that so much so that you do in fact basically. And this is where again, the existential element of this
is very much part of this. Yeah. And of course, what is really interesting there is people study this, and I'm not going to go into the all of the long esoteric words here, but there are certain disciplines that look at this relationship between humanity and society and technology, and really sort of blow apart this idea that either technology is just an object, or technology has got its sort of own life, and we just sort of follow on where technology and innovation go. It is very clear now that being human and being part of society are intimately intertwined with the technologies that emerge, and how those in turn redefine who we are and what we do. So there is that deep interrelationship there.
Absolutely. And that's...
Yeah, and I was simply going to say that what we're seeing now with AI is that being revealed in ways that I think have been hidden before.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And that's this, that's one of the tensions that is so, I think, and again, this is something that was written in the, middle of the 20th century that is just as, if not even more perhaps meaningful today, that, I'm pulling this up to throw this out there, but I'm hoping more people will start thinking about through some of these lenses also, right? Because, I mean, a lot of these things are cyclical, right? These big shock waves of technological advancement. We can argue whether or not this one is more so than any we've ever seen before, right? That's a different argument. But we've seen these periods of time in human history where we've had these massive change. I mean, the written word, right?
Yes,
I mean, all the stuff we're doing today, not possible without the written word, right?
Yes,
so we've had these times. So there's lots. If we look back over human history, there's lots of really interesting ways to think about these things, and I think that is incredibly important because even using Heidegger's sort of works from the 1950s is, again, setting up the stage of, if you allow the world to be only seen through the technology, right? That is in his words, that's an existential risk, essentially. However, the same tool can be used by having basically this idea of like a reserve, that you use this tool, but you're aware of how this tool is being used in that world, gives you essentially the armor not to get sucked into it to the sense where it becomes a existential runaway, but gives you the opportunity to stand back and have a bigger perspective of exactly that and exactly what we do. What does it mean to be human now that this tool is here and it has exposed the world to us in a different way? But what does this mean as we move forward now? So it's not this anti-technology movement. In fact, it's more so than that. It's the intentional embracing of it and understanding the affordances, the constraints, the limitations, the harms, all these things that we talk about. And it's done so in such a really, I think, beautiful way.
But it shows just how important this is. And the fact that there have been people that have been thinking about this for decades, longer than decades now. And the thing that constantly strikes me with these conversations is just how important it is, especially at this point in human history, that we have this nuanced and sophisticated understanding of our relationship with technology. If we don't, we're heading, I think, for something really quite unpleasant in the future. If we just think technology is technology, it's just a thing that does stuff and we want it to do more stuff faster, and we forget that relationship with what it means to be ourselves, what it means to be human, we will end up discounting ourselves, what it means to be human, just for the sake of things. And the faster things go, the more important that becomes.
Absolutely. I mean, I think to playing right into that, right, as you have this, we'll call it the danger, the over gestell, the over enframing, right?
Yes.
So, and you can feel this today, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, if everything is seen as data or as a resource that can be processed, crunched, or whatever, how does that shape our identities when it becomes over, I'm trying to think of a word of like datafication. How do you say datafied? That's not a word.
Yes.
The over datafication of human lives.
Right. Yes.
Right. And we've talked about this before, but also when you live in that world, you run this risk of this homogenization, this push to the middle, right? Where creativity, diversity, everything gets kind of pushed towards this calculable mean, and you lose those edge cases, which is often where the new injection of thought
that's
and
where
creativity.
the artisanal academics lie.
That's where the artisanal.
Maybe they do have a purpose in the future.
We do. They gotta keep them on the fringe. Maybe more ways than one, but you keep them on the fringe. But again, with that though, this is what, and I think what resonated so much, because I remember reading this work 20 years ago, but having it come back around for me recently is also, again, seeing the value in this idea, and again, this reflective thought engagement, or as you can translate it from his work, this saving power, right, which is questioning and being mindful of the technology's essence. We can resist that trap of the over-gestell, right?
Yes.
That we keep ourselves grounded by asking these critical questions that the future of being human does. I mean, that's our whole point, is what will it mean to be human in this technologically advanced future? AI being one of the many technologies that are pushing us towards this, the space. But it's incredible, I think, to think about. To think about it in those ways.
Incredibly important. I mean, again, especially at this place and time. And so as an example of that, this is my life thinking about things like this, but even I'm finding it very easy to be sucked in with what's happening with AI in particular at the moment. But that, as you say, does extend to other areas. So having that ability to think critically and broadly about what's happening and how to sort of hold on to what is actually important in terms of what defines us and what defines the sort of society and communities that we want, it seems to be vitally important.
Absolutely. Now, I don't know which order this podcast versus, because we recorded one too where I was talking about my defense against the dark arts of the hype bubble. And it is sort of that same thing of recognizing
we live in a time warp, by the way. So who knows what's going to come first?
Well, that's the thing. Well, to kind of show the behind the scenes here, we record these things and then things happen.
I know.
And we're like, we're going to have that one next week. And then something happens. We're like, no, we got to push that because
some things around.
Exactly.
Yes.
But that is one of those pieces where you can feel yourself falling into the hype cycle, the excitement, whatever, the reality distortion field, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
You can feel yourself falling to that enframing, as I'll put it, and I'll use Heidegger's terms. But then it's having that cool off, that awareness, that lifeline back to reality, if you will, to kind of pull you back out to say, well, what does this actually mean? Mm-hmm. How should we actually be thinking about this? Because I think, and this is one of the ways I used, for example, this morning, I used the deep reasoning thing to come up with some ideas. I said, I want to talk about this in the framing of this.
Hold it, back up. So this podcast episode is being guided and directed by deep research.
This part now, starting now.
Right.
I feel like we need like a canary. Okay. The first part was the artisanal collection.
Okay, right. So the first part was the human part. Now we're getting on to the AI generated.
The part that will make more sense, be more clear, is the AI part.
Right.
But what I asked it to do real quickly, I said, I want to talk about, as we talk about the advancements of artificial intelligence, all these kind of things, but also in the context of Heidegger's philosophy, with this, which is a theme that we come back to quite often, is this tension between progress at all costs.
Right. Yes.
Right. And so I was curious. So I threw this in there, and and again, coming up with these warnings or these issues, but again, coming back to this idea of as the arrow of time moves, and right now it only goes in one direction, and I mean, maybe there's some challenges to that, but in our human existence, we can only access it in one time, one direction. Is again this warning that I think we're sounding over and over again here, but is to not become so entrapped in that technological way of thinking. And I extend that to this idea of development at all costs.
Yes.
There's too much at risk to do that, thinking, and this again, going back to the podcast I was listening to earlier that got my blood boiling, was to in my, this is my opinion, when you say don't worry about that, we'll come up with a new technology later to solve that
Right.
is basically a non-answer
Right.
because you're just kicking it. You're saying, wow, I do this all the time. That's future Sean's problem.
Right.
You know, like the water jug runs out. I don't want to change that right now.
It's the double or nothing approach to gambling. You know the house is going to win at some point.
Yeah, right. Exactly. But to me, that's always this, it comes back to, again, this issue. And it's, you know, I think the need for this conversation is more prescient than, more needed than ever.
Yep.
Because I think the real answer is a very nuanced one. That is very, because it is not. It's, you know, I think you could be, and at some point I need to grab Reid Hoffman's new book, right?
Yes, super agency.
Yeah, because it doesn't. It categorizes, right? It's like the Zoomers, the Boomers, the Doomers, and the Gloomers, or something, right? And it's like these personas of you know. So like the Boomers, I think are the Bloomers, not Boomers. The Boomers already exist. That's already been taken. Yeah. But like Zoomers are the everything at all costs, right? Yep. The Bloomers are more. There's huge value here, but we need to be careful and see how it grows, right? And then there's, of course, the gloomers who are like, oh, man. Yeah. And then the doomers are like, we're all going to die. It's over. And so, but the question was posed like, well, which category do you fall into? And I'm like, I don't think you can answer it as simply as that.
Yeah, because humans aren't black and white. You don't just we don't slot into these nice, well-defined sort of categories.
No. And to me, the way I was, instantly thinking of, I'm like, not to pull in other, scientific fancy buzzwords of quantum mechanics, but this idea of like, no, it is sort of this swirling ball of all four. It's a probabilistic sphere of,
we're all in a superimposed state,
yes,
a set of states.
And it can be any of them. And it's only when you measure it by what event, right? So are you a zoomer, bloomer,
Reid Hoffman missed a trick here. He should have had the quantum mechanics theory of superagency, where everything is superimposed. You could be anything until somebody collapses the waveform.
Reid, if you're listening, Andrew and I
you might want a sort of a second edition where you just put this in.
I'm just going to float. Andrew and I, we're happy to help with a version 2.
It's slightly embarrassing because neither of us have actually read the book yet, but we're still commenting on it.
Exactly. Hey, we're running a podcast, man. Right. We're allowed to do that. But that's what really got me thinking in this way about that is like, you can have these, because I also, again, this is also a reflective thing of like myself. I feel being pulled in any one of those 4 directions differently depending on what's happening. It could be the tool itself. It could be the company behind the tool. It could be the timing or the implications so on one tool on a Monday, I might feel very Zoomish, like let's go all, full speed ahead. And then a different tool, or even that same tool, once you learn more about it, suddenly you're like maybe doomish.
Zoom to doom in
Zoom
2 days.
Doom in 2 days. But I think that's the nuance that accompanies these things is every single. Whether it's, like I said, whether it's a new tool or just a new day in the global existence of how things shift, right, is that positionality is very fluid.
Right.
It's on a spectrum, if you will. I like to think more in 3 dimensions. So I like more of the superposition of it's a sphere of probability. When you look at it, where is it on that day? It's in this quadrant, it's in this quadrant, but yeah, because that's one of the things that I was taking away. And as I'm thinking about, again, going back, thinking about Heidegger's work in this is like, where do you, and having that, for me, I'll phrase it this way. My safety line back to, a stable reality is always pulling up higher and trying to be like, okay, where is this in the broader global scheme of how I envision the world and see myself in it? What does that mean for me? And then that's when you start asking these questions. Like, what does this mean for me, even personally? What does this mean for people like me, my family, my, my colleagues, my friends, the people I, are in community with? How do I envision these changes? And then asking all those questions that, we're trained to ask these questions.
Right.
Well, who's disadvantaged? Who's advantaged? Who's disadvantaged? But really, I would hope that one of the things we can do is empower people to start asking those
in exactly the same way. Yes, not just, or in fact, not thinking at all because everybody's crazy busy, but having that ability to at least think 2 or 3 steps ahead. and use our thinking to inform decisions in the immediate future.
Yeah. And something I think is worth noting, I'll just put it out there. I don't know if you'll agree with me or not. But it's also this like giving people permission to go back and forth.
Yes.
Like, I mean, because this is also as scientists, as things, once you learn more, it's perfectly acceptable to change your position on it based on now that I know these things, I change my mind.
So this is where I talk and write so much about the concept of humility. And I still feel slightly embarrassed. It feels like a sort of a squishy sort of concept that you maybe don't want to talk about in polite society. But having that humility to recognize that you don't know everything, that there are new things coming along that may change what you think, or that circumstances may cause you to sort of oscillate back and forth and waver, and understanding how to leverage that with humility, I think is incredibly powerful. And I would say that some of the most profoundly interesting and exciting scientists and academics I know are driven by that humility. They take great delight in what they don't know or what they learn that changes how they think.
Yeah, 100%. I'm glad that was much better put than I. The clumsy. I need to work on my artisanal.
It's almost like saying, as soon as you're absolutely sure about something, the one thing that we're sure about is that you're absolutely wrong.
Yeah. Well, and I mean that's a beautiful thing because one part I would, and again, depending on let's say like the more celebrity sphere of intellectuals on social media platforms. One thing that has been frustrating for me is you see people get pigeonholed into they made a claim either positive or negative, and now it's like that's the flag they planted.
They have to stick to it.
That's the hill they now will have to die upon because. And that's something that I really have an issue with is that any change in that perspective is seen somehow as like a weakness or, and I'm like, no.
And I think you have to be careful. And so we're not talking about being wishy-washy.
Right.
We're talking about actually thinking and reasoning through stuff.
Yeah.
But having that ability to sort of change your perspective and understanding and even the actions you're taking based on new insights, new knowledge, new understanding.
Yeah. Because I think I'll throw out maybe one more way for us to take this conversation for a little bit, and then maybe we'll end there.
Yes.
But so thinking about that, right? Like when we talk about, and I think about this, like what metaphor to use? You wear multiple hats or whatever when these technologies come out, because you can be equally excited about the maybe you think about it in a more global terms. I'm really excited about where this might take us humans. But then you can, I mean, this is maybe I'll just expose the tension that I live with. I'll get very excited about that. What does this technology mean from a truly transformative milestone that has potential? Like I'll spare the AGI thing, but what we can develop as amazing tools that we just like, as we talked when we were opening, that allow us to do incredibly amazing things in a very short period of time that we've not been able to do until now. So you can get excited about that while at the same time being very concerned about what we're losing.
Yes.
Right? What the threat of if we lean too heavy in what we're gaining, what would we lose?
Yes.
And so you can equally be excited and hesitant or concerned, right? Which can cause that tension alone can cause you to go, I don't know what to think. I don't know how to feel.
Right.
But because I come back to it, right? If we pick on the artisanal, I learned like that. We might need to call this up, but that might be a show title: artisanal scholar or whatever.
Yes. Or artisanal intellectual.
Artisanal intellectual. That's a show title. That's what it'll be. But when you come back to it, you start questioning too. Well, like if you start to lean into these affordances, you start to maybe not use those muscles, if you will, as much. Then you become reliant because you've gotten rusty or whatever. But then you start sacrificing these things, or just in other ways where generative AI tools, for example, are really getting good and they're encroaching on, the workspace that was for creative individual, even just like creative writing or something. But, and then it raises these questions like, what do we stand to lose?
That's
like,
right. Yes.
And I don't know what the answer is there, but I think, I guess my point is that
But we should be thinking about that.
Should be thinking about it, and it's okay to have those conflicting viewpoints at the exact same time.
I think so. Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's or I'm just seeking comfort.
No. I
for my own discomfort, for my own issues.
I'm sure people will disagree with this, which is good because that's what you hope for. But certainly through my own work as a scientist, as an academic, as a thinker, as well as somebody that actually does stuff in the real world, the greatest value I find is being able to sort of hold sort of multiple things sort of in your head at the same time and not be absolutely certain. Because then that gives you the flexibility of understanding and seeing where things are going. And I've got this ridiculous sort of picture in my head, which is all your fault, Sean, from this conversation. But it's like the difference. I've used this analogy before, but I'm going to use it in a slightly different way. The difference between digital computing and quantum computing. So digital computing is all about sort of ones and zeros, right, wrong.
It's literally electricity. It's on or off.
And you can do incredibly powerful things with it. You can have very, very sophisticated systems made up of lots and lots of ones and zeros.
I mean, every digital experience we every video game, computer, television, it all runs that way.
But it hits its limits.
Yep.
And the way to get yourself out of those limits is to have multiple possibilities rather than just two, 1 or 0, yes or no, right or wrong. And this is what one of the things that quantum computing does. It gives you a space where multiple possibilities exist simultaneously, and you can build on that until everything sort of comes out with a solution. And I feel that sort of in terms of thinking about the future and responding to what's happening, that idea of holding sort of multiple possibilities simultaneously becomes incredibly more powerful than just having that binary idea of right or wrong.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even tying this back, so let's bring this back.
Yes,
right to. I mean, thinking about even in our, in our own domain of working with something like OpenAI's deep research.
Mm-hmm.
Curious what your thoughts are. I mean, you kind of mentioned again this push to this artisanal scholar of being kind of this antiquated way of looking at it. But perhaps more pragmatically in the near term future, I mean, how do you see this really sort of changing the way our work gets done?
Yeah.
And by extension, I mean, something that I look at and I'm and I feel these vibrations of excitement of this is an opportunity to really redefine how we kind of measure our work even.
I think so. And I've no idea how this is going to go.
Yeah.
But I am pretty sure, again, if you think of this technology and other companies are producing similar technologies as the worst it's going to be.
Yeah.
I find it very hard to imagine the future being anything other than transformative. And I'll give you an example of that, which to me is profoundly disruptive in ways that I don't think people are thinking about. And that is the question of what is the value of a PhD? So you think about a PhD.
For all of us with them, it's the most valuable thing in the world.
Right, no. But
back up the trucks with money, come on.
The idea of a PhD is you using your intellect, your power of reason, your power of research.
Yep.
You come up with new knowledge. You expand our understanding of everything around us. You generate what we refer to sometimes as knowledge outcomes. But it has got to be something new, something that has never existed before. And you do that through the power of your very human intellect. It's not something that's everybody can do. And it's not a superpower. It's just some people's brains are wired in such a way that they can do that. However, if you think that the knowledge you're generating through that process, you take 3 to 5 years to do it, there's a possibility that a person working with advanced AI can do exactly the same within a matter of days.
Yeah.
Now, if that's the case, what is the value of a PhD? Is the value just in the journey? Because the knowledge that you get, you can actually, in principle, in the future, generate in a few days with an AI.
Sure.
So it's not the new knowledge that's valuable. Is it the journey? And is the journey really that valuable? I don't know the answer. But I will tell you, I'm running an experiment at the moment, and fingers crossed I might actually have something to write about by the weekend. I'm trying to see how far I can push deep research to write a dissertation. And I don't think it won't get all the way there, but even if it gets 50 or 60% of the way there in a few days, that to me is a game changer because it tells me that a bright PhD student coupled with advanced AI like this can do the intellectual heavy lifting of a PhD in days or weeks rather than years.
Yeah.
That to me changes everything. And then you expand that out to almost any other region where people are doing stuff or people's value lies in their intellectual and research abilities. I think this is where we get to see a future where if you're doing it on your own, the outputs aren't going to be worth anything because you could do more faster with AI. So then the question is, what is the value of what you're doing as a human?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's funny because as you're talking about that, I mean, I have so many threads popping off. But, because again, and we've talked about this time or two before, is the idea, as these things progress, the movement to a post-scarcity, a post-knowledge scarce for certainly, right?
Yes. Where sort of intelligence is free.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I think that will happen much sooner than people will give up money, right?
Right.
Money and power.
Yeah.
But like in terms, and because this is a legitimate threat to any institution of that is like, you come here to learn and, have these experiences. And I mean, when we had our holiday episode, I think Ed did a really good job of kind of defending the role of the university.
Did. Yes.
Which was good. But if we think about it just in terms of that scarcity model, because I think again, when you're seeing these tools now, so 10 years, 20, a reasonably short time frame, 20 years from now, if that knowledge generation and that knowledge acquisition is ubiquitous, it's easy, it's open, everyone has access to it. When I was thinking about, what's the value of the journey?
Right.
I'm like, to me, and I guess I'm heavily influenced again by digging back into Heidegger's work, but the value of that journey is being tethered to make sure that you don't fall into the trap of the gestell.
Right.
That you don't, because you can see, right, if you go that way, you say, well, yeah, we can circumvent the long journey.
Yep.
Well, what happens then? Now we're become so reliant on this tool. And going back to comments that Mark had said, well, who owns the tool? Who's putting their thumb on the scale?
Yep.
The stochastic parrot conversation and the bias comes back into play there as well.
Right.
And so the journey becomes the awareness, that lifeline back to the broader
I think you're exactly
piece.
Right. Yes.
But I think what's exciting about that is it changes, and this might be of wonderful relief to future PhD students, it changes the way you would progress through this program, which it isn't, we all have our war stories, right, of these things. And it's, but if that changes, it really then becomes this difference of the labor, and what's difficult is not, can I put these ideas together and generate new knowledge? That might become somewhat simple in the future, right?
Yep.
But really the challenge and the difficulty becomes in, how do I position this and understand its role in our collective future? What does this mean? And how, because, again, I run these scenarios too. Well, what happens if just the power goes out? Right? Nothing nefarious, no existential, whatever.
Right.
Just the power goes out. And then you're going, can you do it without these tools? And the danger of becoming over-reliant on anything, any system.
Right. No, I think you're exactly right. And part of that, I think, is separating out knowledge from scholarship. So yes, we are developing knowledge generation machines, which is great. But that is not the same as having the intellectual ability to think, to understand, to contextualize, to dive deep, and connect all that back to inherently what it means to be human, who we are, and what is of value to us. So I think separating out, to a certain extent, just the knowledge products from the scholarship, which is part of the journey, then becomes increasingly important.
Yeah. And it allows, and what I think was so exciting about that is it allows us to sort of redefine what does that mean and what does that look like?
That's right.
Because I think, I'm not a betting person, but I would say a bet not to make is that it'll stay the way it was.
Right. I think you're right.
And by staying in front of that is really being, a co-creator in these things, right? So using these technologies, demonstrating, and that's, you and I have been talking about, we've got future projects that we'll explain later, but that part of it is not just showing the output, but it's also showing the process. How did we do these things with these tools? And what,
comes back to the old adage, show your work.
Show your work, right?
It's important.
It's very important because, I think, that's a piece that's not just relevant professionally, but I think culturally as well as like, what was the journey? I mean, so often we see just the tip of the iceberg of the effort, the failures, all these kind of things. And I think that's a piece that I would like to see better celebrated is the journey itself. Like, wow, you came up with this amazing thing. That's great. But how'd you get there?
Yep.
I mean, even with films, one thing I love watching films is like, I want to see the making of, I want to see the behind the scenes. I want to, I want to hear the director's commentary of like, oh, well, we had to do this and we didn't have that. So we had to switch this thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's,
it's the same with art. You see a picture, which is great, great painting, but actually understanding the process that the artist went through getting there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And everything that sort of led to that, that just enriches substantially the experience.
Absolutely. And that's the part that's the part that is to me, and the most valuable is that it's the part you don't see.
Yep.
Right.
You're right.
So,
Yep.
Awesome. I don't know. Should we call it?
We should from one artisanal intellectual to another. We should call it a day.
Our sandwich is finished.
Right.
We finished building this. Yeah, fantastic. Well, and so I will drop like usual. I'll try to stuff the notes with the links to some of the stuff that we were talking and sharing about. But Andrew, this is so much fun.
Of course, it's great to have these conversations, and hopefully people will enjoy them. Spread the word. And
let us know.
Give us the virtual thumbs up.
That's right. Let us know. Let us know how things are going. Or if there's maybe I'll even throw this out there. Is there some big topic we haven't covered yet that people are dying to learn about?
Yes.
I can envision us doing like not a live version of like an Ask Me Anything kind of thing where we just take a lightning round and just do our best.
Right.
I don't know. That might be a disaster. But
we could
even
try.
better if it is, maybe. I don't know. Well, awesome. Well, thank you to everyone who has been listening. And again, please do, share and like us and leave us a review and all the things that you do with podcasts that you love. We'll
see you next time.
See you on the next one.
Demodulating signal.
Modem Futura is a production of the Future of Being Human initiative at Arizona State University. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. To learn more about the Future of Being Human initiative and all of our other projects, please visit us on the web at futureofbeinghuman.asu.edu.
End transmission.